watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have all your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is John Howard, property developer, investor, author, mentor, TV panellist, and heaven knows what else.
I feel quite tired just listening to that.
Well, I know.
Stephen, but thank you very much.
I don't know where you get the energy from.
Well, you just got to get on with it, haven't you?
Okay, good trip in, John?
Yes, thank you.
Good, okay. Good to see you again. And Ryan Hughes, founder of the Mr. Investa concept, buy-to-let experts. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good drive down?
Yeah, nice smooth drive.
Quite a way for you though, I think, isn't it? How long were you driving?
Just over 4 hours.
Crikey. Don't know how you afford the petrol. Must be a cost these days. Anyway, good. Good to have you both here, and we'll start off with John. And your first question, John, is this. Certain mortgage lenders put a service charge cap on the building, stating that service charge must not exceed 1% of the capital value of the property they're about to lend on. Is there any way to challenge this, as in some cases the residents have obviously opted to own apartments in buildings with a very high level of facilities, perhaps swimming pools, gyms, communal lounges, etc. And in these cases the costs really are just what they are. For example, the cost of chlorine now for swimming pools has gone through the roof and will have its consequential effect on the service charge. Restricting the borrowing potential in these cases just doesn't seem fair. What do the panel think?
Well, the first thing is, don't talk to me about swimming pools, because I've had one for a long time and it gets used about 7 times a year from what I can make out. Anyway, there's always someone turning up to clean it.
Yes.
What I would say, 1% of the value of the purchase is a lot of money. So it's a £500,000 flat, £5,000 service charge. Well, to be quite honest with you, you shouldn't be paying £5,000 service charge on a £500,000 flat in the first place. So probably, in my view, it's quite sensible of the building societies and lending institutions to put this limit on. Because the one thing that will stop a flat selling, is if the service charge is too high. And Ryan, with the buy-to-lets and so on, a lot of investors buying flats, the service charge is the one thing, isn't it, that really can kill an investment property. So I don't think, on the whole, it's wrong. Now, you might be surprised I've said that, but.
Well, I am a little. Because
I disagree with you.
You know where I live, and
yes, I do know where you live,
and you know what facilities are in there. And I've got to say that our service charge is probably 1.5 to 1.75% of capital value now, which is
unmortgageable.
Which is pretty unmortgageable,
well,
unless you've got.
I'll make you a bid if you want.
Okay, well, what are you, sort of buyanyhouse.com?
Buyanyhouse.com.
Yeah.
Or any penthouse.
But I take the questioner's point. You know, it's a conscious choice, isn't it? You look at a building, it's either a very basic building, and it just has perhaps a concierge during working hours and then perhaps just a post room, and that's the end of it. Or you're going another type of building where there's a gym, there's a pool, there's lounges, there's libraries. It's got to be paid for, hasn't it?
It has got to be paid for, but I do think that we're calling building societies, I mean, there's lots of different lending institutions now, are actually protecting their investment, and they're protecting the person purchasing in a way. The only way you could look at it slightly differently, I think, perhaps, is to say, well, can the resident who's buying this afford that service charge on top of all the other expenses they've got?
I think that's a natural sort of stress test question, isn't it, really?
Maybe.
And I mean,
but you can see why they're doing it, Steve.
I can, but the counter argument to that is that if you put too much pressure on the service charge, keep pulling it down, do what the government have been doing for the last 10 or 12 years, which is, austerity, cut this, cut that, cut the other. All that's going to happen is your building is going to deteriorate.
And your investment also.
And your investment drops,
Yeah, with it.
With it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Ron, what do you think?
I think there's definitely more room for options needed because we have some very basic developments now, but we also have this new lifestyle development, and that is where they need to calculate what the price is, what facilities are on offer, because it will stop the specification going up. And I think that's one thing that the whole of the UK can benefit from: higher quality living, not only residential, even in student accommodation, we've seen it now. Without the added facilities, you can sometimes find larger void periods, lack of occupancy, especially from a buy-to-let perspective. You have to have a cinema, you have to have a gymnasium. In the residential market, you don't want people jumping
Ryan,
from
I think
your
I might move in. I might move in.
Well, you
no garden, great.
You don't want the tenants hopping from building to building going, oh, they've just opened a new gym, they've got a restaurant downstairs. Manchester has been able to have this fantastic growth spell due to the specification. So if the lenders stop that, then the market stops, in my opinion.
It does, Ryan, but 1% is quite high anyway. Yeah,
but
1% of the value
but John,
of the property.
costs are what they are.
And the other interesting thing is, of course, as the value of your flat goes up, does the building society take that into account? Because that's in 3 years' time, say it's worth 600.
Yeah, but hold on. We've just gone through a period here where a lot of people haven't had the EWS1 certificates. No. Actually, prices have dropped because of that, because there's been no activity. People can't sell their flats. So just watch that argument, because if it goes the other way,
it gets worse. Good point. Okay. Good point. I'm all positive today. I'm all positive.
I think, Ryan, you can both tell we've been in the property business a long time. I think we've seen all these ups and downs. Ryan, your question. And this is quite up to the minute and sometimes a little bit controversial. With the government suggesting that pets should be allowed in rented property unless there is a strong reason to refuse, I note that Mr. Gove suggested that a deposit could be increased to cover the eventuality of damage. Would this not breach the regulation stating that 5 weeks' rent is the maximum deposit allowed? Further, if the head lease of a multi-unit development stated no pets, would the new legislation overrule previously issued legal documents, i.e. existing lease conditions? There you
question, whoever sent that in.
It is a good question, and it comes back to these lifestyle choices in terms of certain developments and properties. We now see developments that are orientated to pet lenders, wash facilities for pets, drinking, snacks on receptions. I've seen it all, but people renting them buildings to know that it's allowed, and it tends to be in the lease. I don't think anything should really ever overrule the head lease, because you're breaking all the rules. Then you're saying it's a free for all, and we've seen it.
Well, if it breaks one issue, it's going to break any, isn't it?
Well, it's not worth the paper it's written on, and that's a big problem. And what you tend to find is you can have 200 apartments or a row of terraced houses, and 1 or 2 people have pets and they ruin it for the whole street. I'm a pet lover myself, but I believe there needs to be clarity in, yes, you can have pets in here, no, you can't. And I still think that it's down to the head lease. And in residential housing, it should be down to the landlord. If it's a freehold property, they should have.
But again, what is somebody like Gove, who is a senior minister in the government, saying things like, oh, just increase the deposit then, which he must know would contravene legislation. You can't take more than 5 weeks deposit.
I think it needs to be, in my experience, the pet has been classed as an additional tenant, therefore the maximum deposit being for them 2 tenants or however many in the household, the pet being treated as a separate tenant, therefore a deposit is allowed to be taken as well as the 5 weekly rental.
Interesting. That's an interesting. Yeah, Ryan, I never thought that, but actually,
well, that's quite an interesting thought. Yeah. I don't know how it would go down in court.
Well, we'll have to see.
Well, people have to tell you, don't they? And if you've got a good management agent that's checking the properties, you'll soon quickly realise if there's a Rottweiler at the front door or a Chihuahua. A lot of people, I think, are open to the conversation when they first start renting. They will say, do you allow pets? And I think it is a bit of a responsibility. During the COVID and the lockdown periods, the pet number increased dramatically, which there has to be a bit of leniency for the health and well-being of people with
I
that
think
loneliness side.
I think one of the problems, Ryan, is, I mean, I was involved with a block down here some time ago that was constructed. I can't tell you the amount of times the managing agents had to call the RSPCA because of distressed animals in what were really glass boxes.
Yeah.
Well,
no fresh air.
I mean, what I would say is the reason that landlords or freeholders in blocks of flats don't allow pets, one of the reasons is to protect the value of that property. Yeah. And if you allow a free-for-all for, first of all, should you have a pet in a flat? That's the first thing I have to question, especially dogs. Yeah. That's the first thing. But secondly, you're protecting everyone else's interests in that block, as well as the building societies, which we talked about earlier. So actually, I don't think this has been well thought out.
No.
Michael Gove, I haven't seen him for a couple of years. When I see him, I'm going to ask him a few serious questions if I get to see him, because honestly, what he's doing to the housing industry at the moment is appalling, in my view. Appalling.
Well, the way I see it, John, they're just constantly looking for sound bites, aren't they? That just, attract the headlines.
Yeah, they're trying to get votes. Simple as that.
Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break when we'll be asking Ryan and John some more of your questions.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello, welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm with John Howard and Ryan Hughes. So, John, we'll get on with your second question, which is this. Where a freeholder is insisting that renovations and improvements are made to his or her building and wishing to put those costs onto the service charge, who would adjudicate as to whether all the works were actually required or whether they are partially the subject of betterment? If the latter, I presume these costs would not be a liability of the residents through the service charge.
Well, that's very interesting. The quick answer to that is the Land Tribunal, which was set up some 20 odd years ago in order to adjudicate on disputes like this.
Right.
You go to them, and I've been dragged along to a tribunal on a couple of occasions. You'll be surprised to know.
I'm sure you weren't dragged there, John.
Because I've had lessees wishing to purchase the freeholds of my blocks. I've had them dispute service charges, and the betterment is one angle they use where, we've gone and spent a lot of money on the block, but of course you have to serve all the notices first. And then they've said, oh no, we're not paying. Well, you are paying, because in most leases it says that the freeholder has to pay the money out first and then get it back off all their lessees. Now that's a big problem. And if anyone's looking to purchase a freehold block as an investment, then be very careful with that clause, because you could put all the money out and not get it all back, and that's towards betterment. But the tribunal is the place to go. It's there's very little cost involved. My advice is don't take a solicitor along, because they don't like that. The whole point is it's a very cheap way of adjudicating a problem, and there's no right to appeal whatsoever. It's normally one chartered surveyor who sits there and adjudicates. And if you're a landlord or the freeholder, as it were, good luck, because they're not on your side. I can tell you that from personal experience.
Okay, I quite like that system, because I think
I'm sure you do.
Well, I'm not keen on these matters going to court, because
I agree.
I've sat with district judges in the past, and I have to say you'd question sometimes their knowledge of property matters, and that's no disrespect to judges. They have a huge, wide scale of things that they have to look at. But at least in those tribunals, it's a specialist that's looking.
It is. One thing I would say, of course, is if you don't like what's happening to your block, if you don't like the way it's managed, then under the Reform Act, you can actually take over the management yourself. Now, taking over a block management is pretty serious stuff these days. You're incredibly responsible for fire and all these other things. If you are thinking of doing that, unless you've got one person in the block who is experienced in doing so, I would always still appoint another management company to do it.
I think you're absolutely right, because even if you have got a specialist in the block living there, how long are they going to live
exactly,
there? Because the management's going to be lasting for 999 years.
Yes, it is now. Under the new rules, 30th of June it came out, of course, 0 ground rents. So if you're a freeholder or if you're looking to build a block of flats now, remember that the value of your freehold at the end on all those 999, and they've got to be 999 year leases now, is 0. 0. So who's going to look after these blocks?
Yes. I can always remember selling a block of flats to an embassy. I won't say which particular one, but they like to make a bit of a fuss of the exchange process, and it was a bit of a bit of a palaver. But anyway, the ambassador looks at me at the end and he said, "These are 999 year leases." So I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Tell me," he says, "what happens at the end?" And I looked at him and I said, "I'm not sure." I said, "But give me a ring a bit nearer the day." Right, and he looked at me and he said, "English sense of humour." Yes, so there we are.
Very good.
But anyway, no, I mean, that is a huge consideration.
I mean, it's a massive thing the government have done with the 999 year leases, 0 ground rents. You know, it's huge, and it's going to have huge ramifications across the industry going forward.
I think I agree. Any comments on that, Ryan?
Just only to the last part there, I think especially in the buy-to-let market, a lot of the developers look forward to that, and we've seen ground rents increase dramatically over the previous years, knowing that that value is based on potentially a multiplier or a doubler.
20 times income at the moment, or has been.
Yeah, so we've seen them every 15 years, every 10 years. Not forever. Some have been very aggressive and they're unmortgageable.
Yes, agreed. And that's wrong, and that's totally wrong, Ryan, isn't it?
And I believe it's massively affecting the market because.
Yes. Well, that's why the government have done what they've done, I think, because of some stupid idiots who've taken advantage.
I think it's great, but what happens to the current ones, the ones that have already been set up? I've seen them now 395, which, based on sort of the Northwest market, is more than the 1%. So now they're unmortgageable because of the ground rent has doubled once. So now when they come to remortgage it.
Can I just quickly tell you this? Bear in mind, we had 5 flats exchange and complete in June, knowing at the end of June there'd be no ground rent. And those solicitors still carried on and completed for their client. How bad is that? So they paid £250 a year ground rent. If they waited to the 30th, they'd have paid nothing. And they still went ahead and did it, and obviously didn't know.
I think something is going to have to happen retrospectively. I mean, my ground rent across the road, it's £750 a year now. Is it? And that doubles every whatever it is.
Well, I don't feel too sorry.
You never do.
No, I'm still waiting for lunch for a start.
Well, it's because I have to pay my ground rent. I can't do lunch as well.
Clearly not.
Okay, fine. Ryan, let's move on to your second question. My house is presently on the market with a leading agent. However, so far we've had no success. If a relative of mine wishes to purchase the property from me directly, what is my obligation to the agent, and would I have any fee liability in this case? My agreement with the agent is sole agency.
Very simple for me. Any good agent taking a property onto the market will ask, is there any interested parties in this property prior to going live? And most people, including ourselves, will have a section that will state them names, whether it's a family member, a friend, a neighbour. It's very easy once the property marketing has been done that someone puts their hand up because they've seen that marketing of the property. So depending on their agency agreement, a lot of them, 3-month term, for example, will have a 14-day cooling off period. Then it's up to them to sell it to that relative. During that period, they would, from my experience, be liable for a fee.
Okay, I think one of the perhaps motivations here for asking was, I know in London we had quite a torrid time with agents at one point when a lot of them used to use sole selling rights.
Absolutely, I was going to bring that point up.
And that becomes very difficult, but there was quite a famous test case with one of the more famous agents in London. And the judge ended up saying, in essence, look, you may have a contract which says whoever sells it, doesn't matter, you get your fee. He said, but I'm not satisfied with that. As an agent, you're going to have to come to court under that agreement and tell the court what exactly you've done to facilitate that sale. And if it's nothing, then that should reflect your fee entitlement.
I think that's probably a good point. I mean, I've got some estate agencies in Norfolk, and all our agreements are sole selling rights. Sole selling rights. So if you see that in a sole agency agreement, sole selling rights, you can query that and potentially and look at it. But at the end of the day, you know, what you've got to remember about estate agents, I'm sure you agree, Ryan, is that we spend half the time working for free.
Yeah.
So the ones that we do have a buyer, or you're signed up and you've spent, you know, in our agency, we probably spend £4,500 selling a property. That's what it costs us to sell any property. I know a high end and so on, I understand that. So, you know, someone has to pay for that. And you know, if you've signed up to legal agreement, you've signed up to a legal agreement.
Mm. Well, look, one of the most prevalent sort of criticisms of an agent is, Christ, what have you done?
You've done nothing for it.
You've earned tens of thousands of pounds, and all you've done is walk around my property once with somebody. No.
They've done the hard bit.
The cost of the portals, the cost of the photography, the cost of the printing, the presentation, it's huge.
It's huge.
And one of the disadvantages, I'm sure, John, well, you're sort of quite a big agency now, but on the smaller agency side, it's very difficult because it's almost a self-defeating business. You know, you go out of the office, you go to try and pitch to get a property on. While you're out, somebody comes in and says, I want to buy it. And they say, sorry, there's nobody in who can show you at the moment. And sort of vice versa. And it becomes very difficult. You know, or to some degree, every time you sell a property, you're sort of ruining your business.
Well, your stock's going down all the time.
Gone, yeah.
And you may not be able to renew that stock.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
No. Well,
I would say that, wouldn't I?
No, nothing ever
so
is.
would Ryan.
There's a lot of people in the world that think that anything to do with property means you're making money, but it's not always the case.
Not always the case.
I think the biggest one has been obviously the market has experienced this current boom led by the lack of stock, and that's where a lot of people, what have you done for your money?
Yeah, spot on.
And they don't see the office costs, the drone, the free detours that you've already paid out for.
But also, Ryan, you know, getting a buyer is 30% of the job, isn't it?
Yeah.
Driving that buyer to complete, getting it to him or her or both of them to complete is a real challenge, and that's where the skill is involved.
Well, getting good and trained staff is also a huge
absolutely.
consideration.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that in the good times in an agency, all you need is an order taker, because people have already made their mind up.
But you still need to get it from A to B.
You do.
And that's a skill in itself. You've got solicitors that, in my view, most of them don't work hard enough and don't do the job properly, you know, and aren't in a rush and all the rest of it. It's a massive, isn't it, Ryan? It's a massive challenge.
We've just had this on the drive down, an in-depth conversation about listing the stock, fine, selling the stock, piece of cake, exchanging, that's where you're getting your money's worth.
Exactly.
Because it may be 1 day to sell, it may be 3 to 6 months to exchange and completion, and then continuous
And you're dealing
time.
with all the problems, Ryan. You're ironing out all the problems in order for the sale to proceed. And that's what people don't understand.
I suppose the final consideration is that people don't take into account the times when the market isn't good.
Absolutely.
And you're still having to run an office, spending all day telling people why you haven't sold their property, but making sure you're there for the next day.
Well, 30% of sales fall through. So that's a total waste of time. We've got to do the whole thing again for free.
Okay. All right, gents. Well, that's all we've got time for today. So, John Howard, Ryan Hughes, thank you both very much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Really good answers to the questions. Thank you so much. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.